Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, a podcast for readers who want something strange and exciting, and writers who need something new. If you want to support this podcast, please consider buying my new book, The National Gallery. I'm extremely proud of this book because it may be my best book, and it is certainly my most personal and heartfelt book. But just because I say it's heartfelt doesn't mean it isn't full of weirdness, like sonnets about Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and elegies for my dead iPhone. For a limited time, if you buy a copy of the National Gallery directly from me, I will sign it, and I will also send you a signed copy of my previous book, The Politics of Knives, for no additional cost. So you can order the book and get your free book with it at thenationalgallery.ca. That's thenationalgallery.ca. I'm also excited because it is my 10-year anniversary as an author. My first book, Ex Machina, was published in October 2009, and to celebrate, now that it is 2019, as I record this, I've made Ex Machina available as an ebook for the first time. It was never available as an ebook previously, and I'm giving that ebook away for free at jonathanball.com/freebook. So go to jonathanball.com/freebook, and you can sign up, get all my exciting news when it's exciting and new, and other free resources that I'll just send you as I create them, plus a free book. And again, you can go to thenationalgallery.ca if you want to find out more about my new book and get a free book as well when you order that. So two free books and a paid book available to you. In any case, let's get into the show. I'm here at Coach House Books, my wonderful publisher, and wonderful for many reasons. But one is because they also publish great books by great authors like Gail Scott, who's here with me today. So I just want to thank you, Gail, for talking to me. And Gail's newest book is actually one of her oldest books, the classic Heroine, which is originally published in 1987, and is just coming out again in a new edition with foreword by Eileen Miles. And how does it feel to have soap with your name on it? Coach House has got this great bar of soap they gave me when I got my copy yesterday. Did you, that's kind of a jokey question, but the kind of more serious question there is, when you were putting this book out in 87, did you ever imagine its reception and that you'd be doing another edition like this many years later?
It's had I was totally astounded at the reception. Actually, it had about 7 printings.
Wow.
And then Coach House, some of them were at Coach House and some at Talon. I think Coach House folded, and then it went to Talon, and then Coach House opened again. And after a while, I thought, I'd like to have it at Coach House. The soap is funny because when James first told me about it, I thought, I guess that could work. And I was in Paris at the time, and a friend of mine who runs a bookstore there said, yeah, but she's not washing in the bathtub.
Yeah. If you're listening and you don't know what the soap thing is about, Heroine, the story is being told by this character who's in a bathtub for telling us a story, and which is relatively stream of consciousness and fragmentary.
She's trying to get off in the bathtub.
Yes. But so she's not really using this soap, but
no.
But it's got that. That's the sort of the promotional item tie-in. It's this bar of soap you can take into the bath with you as read Heroine and whatever else you want to do.
But actually, when I saw it, people were loving the little matchbox. It's a little matchbox with a picture of the Heroine cover on it, and the soap inside, and people were completely delighted with it. So it's a good idea.
Can you talk a little bit about when you were actually originally writing this book then, and kind of maybe what that process was like, when you were putting this, when you first when did you first get the idea to write this book? Because you'd already had a book out, or this isn't the first thing you'd done. Right?
I had a collection of short stories called Spare Parts first.
Yeah, and then when did you really start on this book, and what was the kind of process of writing it
Well,
at the time?
You're asking me to go back away. But, well, first of all, I was a journalist in Quebec, and I worked for several major newspapers covering art and politics. And I tended to get sent out to the French events because I could speak French, which wasn't that widespread in the English community in those days. And things were rapidly politicizing and getting really pretty wild in Quebec. And along with that, of course, the art world was waking up to trying new things and so on. So I did spare parts as a kind of reaction against journalism in a way. I wanted to get away from the actual just recounting and sort of try and use language like poets do in a bit, with all of the tonalities. And then as I started, then I was involved in the left, and I started exploring all these things like André Breton and Leon Trotsky's relationship, and just started thinking really hard about the relationship between art and politics, or as I probably called it a little obsequiously in those days, art and revolution. And at the same time, I got involved with a group of Francophone women writers who were just really ready to change everything. And the most known one is Nicole Brossard, but several other wonderful writers. And what we were doing was basically just trying to find new forms to really express what we had to say. And for me, that was in a direct trajectory from journalism, where I always felt like I always felt restricted. Yeah,
it's interesting that so many writers who work as journalists, of which there are many, like their journalists' approach often informs their writing. Whereas, Hemingway being the most famous example, whereas you seem to have gone in the absolute opposite direction, which is interesting to me. Of almost, here's all the things I can't do in journalism, and let's just double down on that approach.
Well, for me, that's a political issue, because when you work for a major newspaper, let's face it, there are interests at stake. It's very hard. For instance, when I was working at the Montreal Gazette at the time of the October crisis. That was another really politicizing moment for me. I was working at the Gazette, and there were words that I just knew I couldn't use, like class, working class, Once I was asked to go out and do a story for they had a Christmas basket section, where you wrote a story about how hard done people were and how they couldn't afford to buy stuff for Christmas, and therefore the Christmas basket would appear. So I said it in a factory with a woman working in a factory. Talked about the work conditions instead and stuff like that, but it wasn't appreciated,
No, it didn't go over well at all.
So,
well, what was that time? So when the October crisis is happening, like what you say, like that was at a moment where you really kind of politicized you in a bit more. Like, what was it about that moment that kind of grabbed your attention and turned it?
Well, lots of things. First of all, living in Montreal, those people don't realize now, because Montreal is, the economy is just so much better, and it's also somewhat more better distributed as well. But in those days, anything east of the Main, pretty well, St. Lawrence Boulevard, was really gritty. I mean, when I looked at Heroine to publish it again, I was surprised at how gritty it was, and yet I know I didn't exaggerate anything. I mean, tons of people were making their living in any way they could, basically, And I understood very early on that there was a problem with the way Anglophone institutions saw Francophone people and culture. And I was, for some reason, probably because I grew up with Francophone kids, really offended by it. So it was really easy for me to be sympathetic with the ideas behind what happened when the October crisis started. And I mean, there were tons and tons of people who felt like I did. You know, they wouldn't go out and do those things themselves, those really explosive things themselves, but they were certainly understood the impetus behind it, and for a lot of us that meant trying various forms of political organization.
And then when you start writing the book, where did that initial concept to have the character in the bathtub, narrating in this fragmentary fashion, like where did that sort of voice come from? Because what really interests me in general with fiction is narrative voice, and particularly these unusual narrative voices. So what I like about, I'm also sitting here looking at your book, The Obituary, the more recent novel, also from Coach House, really excellent book, which has a very experimental structure as well. You've got these differing narrators, one of which is a fly, literal fly on the wall. One of which is this sort of I/R, this Rosine character, and you've got other figures that seem to be ghosts. You've got this very kind of you've got this very interesting approach to narrative voice and these kind of intriguing, unconventional narration that style that you use. So I'm really interested in like just how you kind of you talked a little bit about how you were kind of drawn to it in the sense of here's all the freedoms that maybe the journalistic style doesn't afford you. But where did you get the idea of marrying that style to this sort of actual story in the bathtub concept?
Where did I get it? I mean,
do you remember like the origins of that when you started, the origins of actually writing Heroine in that sense?
I don't remember exactly how she got to be in the bathtub. I know that I wanted to have her located in a gritty part of Montreal, in what they called there in those days anyway, even in French, tourist rooms, which were sort of like really cheap bed and breakfast, I suppose, or not even breakfast, just bed, basically.
Bed and bathtubs.
Bed and bathtub. And it seemed like a good place to put her to tell the story, because I wanted to bring her friend, lover Marie into it, and I wanted her, the bathtub was by a sort of dirty old window, and so she could talk about what was going by outside. But also, it was the beginning of a trajectory towards really breaking down the narrative voice, which for me is also a very political issue. I mean, it happens in poetry, and people don't think anything of it, but it doesn't happen in prose, and we're always expected to have that kind of story where something happens and it comes out one way or the other, good or bad. And I just feel that that's not the way we think, and it's also not the way we're going to change anything. So I just decided that I was going to change the narrative structure. Actually, she's in the bath, but the story goes around and swirls around her, kind of, while she's in the bath. So there are various love affairs and various political demonstrations and hanging out in cafes and stuff, but it all goes around. And she's kind of not a real narrator. Her name is Gail. Mm-hmm. She's a failed revolutionary. She is pretty good at the political aspect of it, but she's a complete failure with what the personal life was a revolutionary was supposed to be, which was polyamorous, which was possibly gay. She couldn't pull any of that off. And so the whole story, that's another reason I guess she's in the bathtub. The whole story is her kind of thinking about her sex life and how she can get it together, and how that relates, in fact, to her writing a novel, because after all, all writing's about desire, right? Finally.
And do you remember like your writing process in this? And I'm curious, like also to know, like between like say Heroine and The Obituary, just looking at these two books that are 23 years apart, if I recall correctly. Maybe longer, actually.
No, 87 and 210.
I can't do math, so
yeah, no, 2010 it's 23,
minus 1987.
23.
So 23 years apart.
Yeah.
So do you remember, did your writing process change at all, or did it change between these two books?
There was a whole trajectory away from from narrative, basically, or from a straight forward narrative. So more and more, I mean, this is the beginning. We talked a lot in the women's movement about things like how narrative was I don't necessarily hold with this anymore, but how narrative was a kind of male concept, and the whole idea of a story that kind of rises up to a crescendo and then falls is a very guy way of thinking about sex and desire, and we were going to do it differently, and that's one of the reasons I kind of invented the spiral.
So you're very
shape.
informed, I guess, by the Sissou and the kind of those ideas.
Sissou and Rerelease was really big in those days. She had plenty to say about stuff like that. And then, I mean, Heroine is a really narrative novel as far as my novels go. The next one was Maine Brides, and it's set in a bar on the Maine, and it's actually an installation. So there's somebody in a bar, a woman, drinking, and telling stories about other women who come in, but you can never really tell if the story's about the woman who's getting a lot of drinks or whether it's about the women who come into the bar. And then My Paris, I decided to break down I started to play with syntax and grammar in a way of breaking down the speaking subject. So I used the present participle instead of the active verb, which actually has the effect of reducing the person who's speaking to something very small. So it's kind of like these little gerund phrases, or I forget what's the proper name.
I think it's gerund. I think.
Yeah,
so,
and she's walking through Paris. She's reading the Arcades Project by Benjamin, and so she's picking up all these little details. But it's sort of like techno music was big at the time, and she was sort of absorbing the city as a very neutral kind of figure, full of very porous kind of figure, because she's not active in the sense of having verbs and plans and going forward, but she's more. And present participle for me goes kind of back and forth and hesitates, in a way.
What about when you get to obituary?
And when I get to the obituary, I decided that if I wanted to continue my permanent revolution of the novel, which is my plan. That's
the master plan.
that's the name of my coming book of essays, maybe. If I was going to, more and more it seemed to me like you had to break down the relationship between the author and the narrator, or so the writing subject kind of explodes in this book, and so the figure called Rosine is actually three different shards. She's the woman on the bed, she's the fly, and the fly's a mask is a male. He's a horny guy, but that's her animus, And then she's also the politically correct lesbian historian in the basement who keeps trying to impose a historical omniscient narrative almost. Yeah. So that's long and involved.
It's got a really well, just to kind of jump to obituary for a little bit, like where did that idea of fragmenting into three come from, and what about having one of them being this fly? What I love about the fly on the wall, what I like a lot in your books is you have as you say this, you often play with that division or distinction, and kind of collapsing it or troubling the boundary between, say, the narrator and the author, which I think is, a lot of people do it badly, and some people do it very well. I think you do it very well in really interesting ways, and where I think what I like about, and I think you also get like weird, interesting meta fictional aspects in there, and also weird meta jokes at times. Like, so to me, the fly on the wall is a really clever, weird. To me, it reads, I don't know if you're intending it this way, but to me, it reads like this weird joke about like Hemingway-esque fly on the wall narration. And like, it's the reverse of that, but it's coming from a literal fly on the wall, which is, it's such a fascinating little, to me, it's like this weird nested series of like meta jokes but in a very engaging approach.
Right. I didn't think of Hemingway at all when I was doing it. I was thinking more of, Well, I mean, the obituary is also a novel about surveillance. There are two cops in the stairwell of the flat that the woman on the bed is either passed out or dead in, and the fly is allies with the voyeurs who are the cops. So there's an old French cop who's a ghost. He's from like the early 20th century, and he's there looking through Rosine's keyhole because he was in love with Rosine's grandfather, who was a part Indigenous, like some of the people in my family, tap dancer. That was my godfather, not my grand. Anyway, a tap dancer who the gendarme fell in love with when the tap dancer came to Paris. Of course, the grandfather wasn't at all interested, but he's been the ghost of the Paris cop was following him ever since. And there's also a student cop, a Quebecois guy, who's trying to hack a computer.
So then, did you pick a fly because of the aspect of surveillance and all the eyes, like the fragments?
Yeah, partly.
Or were you also thinking of the fact that maybe this is a corpse and is attracted to fly?
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, he talks about how he has 100 or 1,000. I can't remember how many eyes a fly has.
I think 1,000. You say.
Yeah.
I don't know offhand, but
yeah,
if I remember right.
Yeah. So I mean, it's part of this. I mean, the fly has a kind of double loyalty because he's also Rosine, So yeah.
Yeah, it's very curious. I mean, just to go to like a more practical side of things, like so when you're actually like sitting down and writing these books, like what was the actual physical process of like writing the books like from Heroine to Obituary? Like what's the difference? Like how long does it take you to write Heroine, for example? Like what's your actual writing process? It
actually took me about. I'm a slow writer because I spend a lot of time unpacking language. I take zillions of notes. I spend a lot of time in cafes listening. For me, the street cadences are really important in terms of how I deal with language. So I started, you're asking me if it was some kind of plan from the beginning. It's more like writing a poem, you just keep writing until it's like peeling the skin off an onion, the layers off an onion. You just keep writing until you've got it. So what's more important for me is my motivation for doing the work than actually the processes tend to be kind of different. Although, by the time I got to the obituary, I was working a lot more with the computer just because all that digital information's available. And so now for my current work, I borrow language all the time. And
so it's very much about having this impetus to do a project. Then you're sort of seeing what the project is as you're going to some degree.
Maybe a better way of explaining it. I thank you for your questions. They're penetrating questions. I think a better way of explaining it maybe is that I'm always when I write whatever project I'm working on, I'm very interested in the conjunctural or the punctual aspect of it, the now of it. So I try to adopt the tone and the style and especially the preoccupations of the work and especially the politics of the moment and my response to those politics in the language itself. So I'm constantly trying to find the kind of sentence, the kind of sound, the kind of tone, the kind of movement that relates this exact moment, this exact conjuncture or intersectionality, whatever you want, when all these things come together. And as long as I don't have the tone, and that's one of the reasons it takes me a long time. I mean, what does the Trump era sound like, for example?
Well, here's the tension that's interesting to me in that whole approach is like, how do you balance trying to capture that kind of nowness with when you're taking a long time, and it is a project that's expanding over a long period. Like, how do you not lose that that moment in that manner? Like, how do you manage that?
Well, first of all, I mean, time, social and political and even artistic time is pretty cyclical. It doesn't last a moment; it lasts a few years. I mean, a few years ago we had the conceptualist movement, which was totally dominant or tried to be for, or you have other moments like that. I mean, when I wrote Heroine, it was the conjuncture between the struggle for the survival and the enhancement of French language, and also for uncovering ways of speaking that would better express female, whatever, femininity, however you want to. We called it écriture au féminin, like writing in the feminine. Excuse me. So, it's a period just the same. It's not like a moment, but I mean, you have to listen to the moment very carefully in order to get that, in order to bring it all together. I mean, that for me, the bigger question is how, once I've done that, which is in some ways it seems to me like how you're a poet, but it seems to me like poets work a bit like that, I mean, they're very
But it doesn't take you 2 years to write one
Well, I know,
poem.
but I mean, then I have
Right?
to, but I mean, a poem's like how many pages could be.
That's what I mean.
No, but then I have to go back and do the work of, without spoiling that, without messing it up, how can I make it into a serial or a series or a shape or a composition? For me, the obituary is very much a composition, Main Brides is a serial. And, well, actually, C.A. Conrad says that the obituary is a serial, too. Maybe all my books are serials.
It's interesting, though, to think of it like, this series of, capturing these moments.
Yeah.
And so over a sustained period, you're sort of maybe you're kind of diving in and out and doing cross sections in a manner of fashion.
I mean, maybe it's easier for me to talk right now because I've been in it for the last several years. I'm writing a memoir about the lower Manhattan poetry scene. That is the poets that I like, who are mostly grouped around the St. Mark's Poetry Project and Belladonna, and in the early Obama years. So for me, the issues for me in that particular book are, one, I'm a Canadian. I call her a Northern who comes to New York and feels and is very left wing. So is therefore quite judgmental of all the Democrat politics. But how does she separate that out from kind of maybe a knee-jerk racism about Obama, and how does she understand what Obama means to African American people? So so that's one tension that's going on, and then another tension is how do you write poems about that, and how are her friends who are writing poetry, how are they dealing with those things? And often it's quite somewhat removed anyway from. It's not as direct as, say, writing prose.
Well, it's interesting just in the way you talk about it, where it's a memoir, and she, so you're switching to yourself in the third person. But she's a she. She's a Northern.
Yeah.
But is I guess is that part of wrapping your head around the project? It's like sort of separating yourself off, like finding your place inside of it, but also kind of dissociating to a certain degree. Like, how do you?
It's part of trying to. Once a long time ago, somebody said to me, a visual artist said to me, "You have to take yourself as typical of your generation." And I mean, I would add at this point, I suppose, more of my moment, since my generation is sort of pretty well locked in, that's one of the things that so for me, she's Gail in Heroine. I don't think she's Rosine.
Yeah, Rosine.
And then she's also Gail in this memoir, which is called Furniture Music. Why is it called Furniture Music? Because I think it's a good title too.
Yeah.
Because it's about kind of traveling with your baggage basically, and being very you're basically background music, and maybe poetry is too in this world. Who knows? I mean, I hope not, but because for me, poetry is the gold standard in a way, And I keep trying to say, okay, but we can do those things in prose too. You just have to work harder at the language.
Do you see yourself as a prose poet?
No.
No,
I don't. I don't like that term.
Yeah.
I don't like. Why don't I like it?
I don't like it either. I'm just curious. Though,
Yeah, I don't. It just.
I get called a prose poet all the time.
Oh, do you?
Like this new book is. I specifically didn't write much prose poetry in it because I was like, I'm sick of people calling me a prose poet.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, people call me a prose poet too sometimes in a funny kind of way. I like it. Fred Waugh says I'm a poet, which I love Fred for that.
Yeah.
But I just feel that the kind of work I do is novelesque in the sense that there's an attempt to work things out. And Baudelaire was a great prose poet, but do we need the same thing today? You know, Jane Austen was a great novelist. Do we need to do Do we need to do these things over and over and over again in the same way?
Well, I see you as like, you know, a novelist also in the sense that Lawrence Stern and Tristram Shandy talks about the novel being primarily digressions.
Yeah.
You know, like a novel is digressions are the heart of the novel, I think is the way he puts it. And I feel like, you know, I feel like not enough modern novels are kind of structured through digressiveness in that manner. And what I like about a book like Heroine, for example, is it has this very simple, clear core, you know, thing that's happening, and then inside of that, you're just digressing and coming back.
Yeah.
And as you say, like kind of circling in a whirlpool-like manner.
Yeah. And Montreal was so great to do that in at the time because everything was so intense. The street life was so intense.
What was it like just to be there in Montreal when Nicole Broussard's coming up, and you know, and like what was that whole scene like?
Well, I mean, Nicole was one of many. You know, she's wonderful, but she's one of many.
What I mean is, like, when you've got like. Oh, that like you had a very hot,
it was so stimulating. It was just so stimulating. I mean, Heroine really comes out of a total sort of energy that circulated at that time. Every day something was happening, something political, something, some kind of crazy gangster thing, or some, you know, the Brinks trucks driving to Toronto with all the money from the banks in it when the October crisis was going on. The Les Nuits de la Poésie, where people were, you know, reading poetry all night, allegedly to celebrate the French language, but also in resistance against the whole situation that was going on then. And I mean, wherever you stood vis-a-vis those things, you couldn't not pay attention to them. Another thing that was really important for me when I was writing Heroine was not. I think when you're writing about a place where the language and culture aren't entirely yours, and people, there's a tendency to exoticize it like crazy. And it was really important for me, and still is, when I write, to write in a way that people from all of the different cultures I'm involved in will not find shameful and cheap, you know. So when I was writing Heroine, I didn't want to exoticize those moments. I wanted them to be seen both from a francophone side and from an anglophone side as actually as close to what one could say the ambience at the time was, you know. It's a tall order, but I that was my goal.
I'm curious, you know, just how like you were thinking maybe through the idea of sharing space. You know, we've got this character in a bathtub, you know, in this very enclosed place inside of another enclosure of the apartment, but then looking out the window and, you know, thinking, you know, about these moments and the book opens with a guard sort of hustling a black tourist, you know, out of this space.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, it seems like part of what the whole October crisis revolved around was that issue of, you know, these different groups, you know, trying to share a space and it not, these power dynamics, you know, coming into play. And it seems like you kind of reflected a lot of that concern around, I don't know what the good term would be, maybe spatiality or whatever term you might use in terms of like figuring out like what is how can a person, like in this case a woman, like have a space in this
that's
weird
a really,
maelstrom.
Yeah, weird maelstrom. Yeah, that's certainly one of the issues, because I mean, she is or has been in a revolutionary organization where there's no space. Really. I mean, her morals have been observed all the time. Was she cool enough when her man was with somebody else? Whatever, and but also just a sharing of politics and of ideas about politics. A lot of really great stuff. But she can't live in that space, really. And the bathtub's, I guess, a retreat in a way, at the same time that she's carving out a space with a group of women for herself where she feels safer. But it's clear that it's not the be-all and end-all. Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting place. The bathtub is interesting because it's this, as you say, it's like a place, it's like a private place to retreat into, but it's also a vulnerable position and a vulnerable space in that respect as well.
Yeah. There are a lot of things going on there because it's warm. The water's warm, It's snowing all the time outside. But it's true. She's lying there and she's naked, and people are knocking on the door, and you can hear people from other apartments and so, or other rooms and so on. And some of them are quite crazy. And but that space is probably the kind of internal kernel of the novel, around which all of these other events, which she also participates. See, that's the thing. That's what makes my narrators different than a lot of narrators. She's not a person who is completely delineated by her whatever topography she's in now. She's kind of like,
she's very, I don't know what the word
all
would be.
these veins are going out to all these other things that she is involved in or wants to be involved in, or people she loves or hates or wants to kill.
I don't know what it would be, but she's like, it's a very kind of permeable narrator in narrative voice, in a sense, I guess.
Later on, I wrote an essay called "The Porous Text."
That's a great phrase.
Yeah, when I was writing my Paris, to explain how taking away the active verb could render a speaking subject a way more porous. If you say "I walking down the street," it's not the same as "I am walking down the street." There's a little reduction there of the I. I think it's time for us to make the I a lot smaller in the novel. I find so many novels really tiresome that way, because they're especially now, because we're talking so much about me all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a place for that too, but it does, like anything else, at a certain point, there's so much of it that you kind of want it to be troubled.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not that people talk about, it's not about talking about either. For me, it's a problem. It's more how you do it,
So just go back to a bit to like when Heroine, originally was published. Like, what was the reception like at that time for the book? Was it kind of immediately?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it surprised me because I thought that the politics of the narrator would be seen as kind of inimical in lots of places, And it was a book that was going from Quebec to English Canada at a time when there was a lot of tension. I mean, the whole story is organized around the 1980 Quebec independence referendum. But the reception was very, very positive. I think people like to have stories told directly, like they are. Yeah.
How did you see that reception of it kind of changing over the years in any way? Like, because have you seen like its interest in the book change? Probably. I mean, once I write a book and start writing another one, I try not to pay too much attention, but certainly, I think, in the 90s, I think that was the beginning of our neoliberal period, maybe, and I think the interest in the kind of politics that Heroine talks about probably weren't very interesting to very many people, But
I don't know. It feels to me now like there's a lot of interest in the issues that Heroine brings up again. You know.
Well, that's the other thing I was wondering is like, what do you think makes it, like a book that maybe still speaks in this time, compared to.
I mean, I think the main thing is kind of an old saw, but the relationship between the personal and the political, and the heroine in this novel, Gail, is very unhappy that she does not manage to live in a non-monogamous relationship with her partner. And today people talk about polyamory, but it's kind of similar. It's a little different, but it's kind of similar. There's a whole swing towards much more radical politics again, leftward. And feminism is definitely back. So those are all issues that are very, and I mean, I think we have this ongoing debate in Canada about how the different parts of the nation or the nations fit together. And I think that's still relevant, I mean, it's not like the referendum years, but people are still asking similar questions and worried about similar things.
Has your actual method of writing changed substantially at all since? Like, what do you do differently or the same as you used to do?
I mean, the main thing that's changed, I would say, would be the capacity to use digital technology to do research and to borrow language, which is we all do now, and kind of I would say that's the major change. And also up until the obituary anyway, I've been going towards really breaking down the parts of the novel as much as I can. And now I'm going to work on some short stories, and we'll see what that gives. I think they might be not maybe breaking down that kind of a prose book in a different way. So, I mean, for me, writing is always a game, always an experiment. And so, of course, it sometimes leads to failure.
What keeps you playing that game? Like, what's the most interesting part of it to you?
You could be ruthless, you just keep...
I used to ask people, why don't you quit? That was my big question.
No, I mean, I have no desire to quit whatsoever. Reason. No, I have no desire to quit.
Not that you should, but I used to, I like to ask that question. Like, I'm just curious, like, why don't people quit? Like, what keeps them going?
I mean, like a lot of writers I knew, that's what I was here for from the time I was about, since the time I could write. Probably you're the same. A lot of the writers I know are like that. I can't imagine life any other way.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me. I appreciate it. And if you haven't already read Heroine, or you should definitely pick up this new edition with this great foreword by Eileen Miles. And I am a big fan also of The Obituary, which came out in 2010, but is really still in print, and an excellent volume out of Coach House as well. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.